Hey guys, this episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast is presented by our newest partner, Operation Christmas Child, a project of the Christian international relief organization Samaritan's Purse, the world's largest Christmas project of its kind. Operation Christmas Child is awesome. Since 1993, they've collected and delivered more than 188 million gift-filled shoeboxes to children in need in more than 170 countries and territories. And it's delivered in the hands of children through local churches. Every shoebox gift is an opportunity to share about Jesus and God's love. So will you join us? Will you join Operation Christmas Child this season by packing shoebox gifts or building a shoebox gift online? National Collection Week is coming November 15th through the 22nd. Shoeboxes are going to be collected across the country at nearly 5,000 drop-off locations. We want you to come and join Operation Christmas Child. Visit SamaritansPurse.org/OCC. SamaritansPurse.org/OCC to learn how to pack a shoebox or build one online. Operation Christmas Child.
Welcome to Sports Spectrum, where we bring Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, former ESPN producer, Jason Romano.
And welcome everyone to the show. I am Jason. This is the Sports Spectrum podcast. We got a great conversation today with Keith Madison. I loved talking to Keith. I'll tell you about him in a second, but man, this was so much fun to reminisce with Keith Madison, a guy who's been around baseball for a very long time, and now he's using baseball as a way to get people to hear about Jesus, and I loved it. It was so awesome to talk to Keith. Before we get to Keith, I want to direct you to our website, sportspectrum.com. That is the home base for all of our content here at the Ministry of Sports Spectrum. If you're looking for podcasts, articles, stories, even our magazine is there. If you're looking for devotionals, they're all available for free right there at the website, sportspectrum.com. When you're there, click that subscribe button at the top, and you can subscribe to our weekly newsletter. It's actually a newsletter icon that's up there. It's called Sports Spectrum Weekly. When you click on it, you put your email address in, and you'll be good to go to subscribe to our weekly newsletter, and we'll keep you informed on all of the things that are happening with regards to Sports Spectrum. You know, the articles and the stories and the podcasts that you may have missed. You can keep tabs on all of those by signing up for our weekly newsletter at sportspectrum.com. Now, Keith Madison, my goodness, this was a lot of fun talking to Keith, a man who is following after God's heart, really. When you think about all that he's doing right now, he serves with SCORE International, a Christian mission organization leading players and coaches on short-term baseball mission trips to the Dominican Republic. And Keith Madison is doing that using baseball as a way to introduce the gospel to these people, to these kids in the Dominican Republic. You see, Keith was a longtime baseball coach, the head baseball coach with the Kentucky Wildcats from 1979 to 2003, 25 years there at Kentucky. And then he just felt God nudging him away from coaching and really entering into a new phase of life working in ministry. But before all of that, Keith was a baseball player at 17 years old in 1969, signing a pro baseball contract with the Montreal Expos. And he tells a lot of fun stories on what it was like to grow up in the 60s. We happen to both be very big Beatles fans, and we also talk a lot about baseball and what life was like in the 60s with the Vietnam War and so many things happening. And Keith Madison not only coming to faith in Christ in the 60s, but then becoming a pro baseball player and having that dream cut short as well. I love this conversation with Keith Madison. Let's take a listen to my new friend, the former Kentucky baseball coach, right here on Sports Spectrum. Keith, welcome to Sports Spectrum.
Thank you, Jason. I've been looking forward to this. I've listened to your podcast many times and feel honored to be a part of it.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, it's great to have someone on the show who's actually heard of and knows the show, which is always nice. You got quite the career, my friend, and I didn't know a ton about you. I remember you were coaching at Kentucky, and a couple people, including our mutual friend Mike Lynch, told me I have to have Keith on. And then I do my research, and I'm fascinated by the fact that you signed a pro baseball contract at 17 years old. So I need to hear that story, because that's really where the baseball journey kind of catapults you and kind of starts to take shape, I would say.
Well, it really ages me, because those kinds of things would not happen nowadays for sure. But
Right.
I was actually playing American Legion baseball for Bowling Green, the Bowling Green, Kentucky Legion team.
Yeah.
And we're playing in a tournament. This is after the draft, okay, in June, after the draft. So we're playing in a tournament down in Paducah, Kentucky, down near the Mississippi River, and in an old minor league baseball stadium. And I was expecting the coach from Murray State University to be there to watch me pitch, because I'm 17. I've never met a college coach. I've never seen a pro scout. I'm a country boy. So I was pretty excited about this college coach seeing me pitch on a Saturday night. But on Friday night, our team gets out to a big lead, and we start blowing that lead. And this sounds like some kind of hokey story, but this is the truth. We start blowing this lead, and about the bottom of the eighth, our Legion coach says, "Madison, get loose." So I'm going, wait, I'm supposed to start tomorrow night. And so I go down to the bullpen and I start throwing, and I don't know whether it's adrenaline or I'm a little bit mad because it's going to take a little bit away from my stuff for Saturday night. But I'm bringing it. And so I go, by the time I get in the game, Jason, it's the bottom of the ninth. The score is tied, and there's no outs, and the bases are loaded. So I'm thinking,
not a great scenario.
No, I'm thinking, as I'm warming up, I'm thinking, man, if I hit this guy, we lose. If he hits a fly ball, we probably lose. There's
Wild
so
pitch,
many ways.
anything.
Yeah,
right?
anything. Yeah.
Yeah.
So true story. First pitch I threw was right at the guy's head, and he ducked, and the ball hit his bat.
Oh.
And so foul ball. So I proceeded to strike the guy out. I strike the next two guys out. We get out of the inning. The game goes into extras, of course. And we go, I pitched 3 innings and struck out 9 guys in a row. It was the most unbelievable, fantastic game I'd ever had in my life. First of all, I'd never thrown that hard. And so after the game, we won. And after the game, my Legion coach says, "Hey, I know you're disappointed because, you threw 3 innings tonight. You were supposed to start tomorrow night in front of Murray State's coach." And he said, "I really feel bad, but there's 2 guys over there by the dugout that want to meet you." And it was 2 pro scouts. And I told you I'd never met a college coach. I certainly hadn't met a pro scout.
Right.
One scout was with the Braves. The other one was with the Expos. And to make a long story just a little bit longer, the Expos coach really follows up, and he's interested, calls my parents, and we meet. I sign it's certainly not a lucrative contract, but I get a chance as a free agent, and they pay for my tuition to go to college because that was something my mother really wanted. And so it was so late in the summer, I actually did not play that summer as a 17-year-old, but I did sign with the Expos. I went to school for a full year, went to rookie ball the following year. But here's an interesting thing. As raw as I was, and even though I wasn't drafted, I signed after the draft. I was in AAA at 19 years old.
Yeah, they elevated you pretty quickly.
Yeah. Well, the Expos were really hurting for pitching. That's one thing. They were and this again ages me, they were a new franchise.
Yes.
And so also it was during the Vietnam War. So a lot of pitchers were in the National Guard, and they would go off for a couple of weeks. So the organization was just short on pitching. So they bring me up really too quickly. So all of a sudden I'm 19, just off the farm, pitching against Carlton Fisk, Don Baylor, Bobby Grish, Richie Zisk. I mean, all these guys that I'm going, wow, these guys can hit. So, I struggled a little bit, but it was a great experience, and ended up, like a lot of stories, I got hurt at the end of that season. Was brokenhearted. I really thought I was a has-been at 20 years old. And then I was just crushed. I was just absolutely crushed. And so, I'm thinking, well, I'll go to school. I have no clue what I want to do. And then the Reds called, and I signed with the Reds and started all over again. Started in A ball and did pretty well and signed a AAA contract when I was maybe 21, 22. And then was playing basketball during the off season, tore my ACL. And back in the early 70s, the torn ACL was pretty much it.
Yeah.
So I tried.
Right, and you never got to the majors, right? You never got a chance.
Never got a chance. They gave me a shot at AA, and I did so, but I just couldn't move, and so then by then I was a little more mature, getting married and those kinds of things, and I thought, hey, I know more about baseball than anything else. I think I'll go into coaching. So I got a job at through those minor league years. I graduated from Western Kentucky University. Got a coaching job in Lake Wales, Florida. So that was pretty exciting for a young couple to get to move to Florida and all that.
Yeah.
We were very poor, but it was fun. It was great. I love the kids. And then got a really good break after 2 years of coaching high school ball. A coaching friend of mine had played for the legendary Ron Polk, who coached at Mississippi State for many, many years.
Okay.
But he put me in contact with him, and I got a graduate assistantship with Ron Polk. And I got my master's in 1 year, crammed it in, and the job at Kentucky comes open. And somehow they hired this 26-year-old kid that only had 1 year of college coaching experience, but I was there for 25 years, so it worked out.
Yeah, and there's going to be a lot that we're going to unpack in that whole story. I do want to go back a little bit because, as a kid, you're saying you're 17, it's 1969, the Vietnam War is going on, and you signed this pro baseball contract. But it made me think, as sort of a history buff, and recently I started watching this documentary, I think it's on HBO, about the year 1968. And I just thought, man, the time in the 60s, and I talked to my dad about this a lot too, as a kid who grew up in the 60s and then graduated in 1969 himself. What would you say life was like for you growing up in the 60s? I'm assuming baseball had a big part of it.
Had a big part in it, and basketball too. I love that. You can't grow up in Kentucky without loving basketball, and my dream was to play Kentucky, of course, like every other kid that grows up in Kentucky, just about. I just, I was a decent basketball player, but not like that. I mean, those guys are really good.
Yeah.
So I didn't get that shot, but I did get it. I mean, my other dream was play Major League Baseball, and so I did get a shot. But I grew up, like I said, that my hometown, the county seat in my county in Kentucky, everybody goes by which county you're from, and it's different.
Yeah.
So I grew up in this little county called Evanston County. The county seat, Brownsville, the biggest town in the county, only had 800 people.
That's tiny.
Yeah, we didn't even have a traffic light in town.
Everybody knew everybody, right?
Everybody knew everybody, and it was so down home. It was like Mayberry. When I would get through with basketball practice or baseball practice, before I got my driver's license, I would hitchhike home 4 miles away. And so my parents said, yeah, sure, just catch a ride. Right. And so I could hitchhike, and I knew everybody. So, somebody would always pick me up. Very seldom did I ever have to walk more than a mile. Somebody would pull over. They knew me. And so it was living on a small farm, just love sports, just could not get enough of sports. If, my brother, I had an older brother who was a really strong, tough guy. And so I would go one-on-one in basketball with him, and he would knock me on my tail, and I'd get back up. And, I learned a lot of lessons and just chores on the farm. But also that thing called the Vietnam War. I mean, you get through playing basketball in the afternoon or working on the farm or whatever, you go in and watch the news with your parents, and they had those scripts at the bottom, 737 lives lost today. And then all of a sudden my friends started getting drafted or signing up or volunteering, joining the Marines. And all of a sudden life becomes real. I mean, it's like, wow, we're actually going over there, and some of my buddies got killed over there.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you because it was such a crazy time. And, that documentary I watched was just on 1968 that year. And Tom Hanks is one of the producers. And it it really showed what that year alone, how it set the trajectory for our country with the assassinations of, Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King, and just so much that was going on with the Vietnam War and a presidential race going on with Richard Nixon. There was so much happening, but it made me think with you, especially growing up on a farm, and you said you were aware kind of the war, but are you aware of all that's taking place, or are you kind of like stuck in your little sports world, which, if I'm being honest, in 1990, that was me at 17.
Yeah.
I was stuck in my little sports world. I knew kind of what was going on, but I was so focused on sports, and I was like, that seems so far out there from my world. What was that like for you, especially growing up in Kentucky?
Yeah. I mean, I thought a lot more about Tom Seaver and Sandy Koufax than I did LBJ or Richard Nixon. I just didn't, those guys really didn't. I mean, they were just presidents, but Tom Seaver, you kidding me? I'd walk 40 miles to watch him throw one inning. So I was one of those kids. I just loved it. I just loved sports, and we didn't get a lot of games on television back then. This is way before ESPN or anything like that. So, you got the Saturday game of the week, and I was glued to the television, watching those games. And so, it was an interesting time, and, it was scary. But I will say this, and I know you'll probably disagree with this.
It's okay.
The greatest music ever came from that era. I mean,
I don't disagree. My favorite band of all time is the Beatles. So
wow. Well, I'll tell you, and I get along really well.
I love the Beatles, and I can't get enough of them. And I'm fascinated by their history of really what they accomplished from 62 to 70. In 8 years, they became the greatest band of all time in such a small period, and then they broke up. So I can deal with the 60s and their music, of course.
Well, my freshman year in college, I told you that I signed with the Expos, but they allowed me to go to school for a year just so I could grow up a little bit, I think.
Okay.
But I listened to Abbey Road, the album Abbey Road, every night. I'm not kidding you, every night. And my roommate and I would talk about, is Paul really dead? And then, there was a number you could call, and you supposedly would hear Paul's voice and all that stuff. It was bizarre. Wow. But it was a fun time, but it was also a time when a lot of young men had to grow up fast. For instance, there were a couple of guys that lived on my floor at the dorm that had already been to Vietnam, and one guy was missing half of his shoulder. And I would sit and talk to him and just be absolutely mesmerized by the fact that this guy has really faced death. And so, you'd have these great times of listening to good music, watching sports, but then all of a sudden you wake up and you say, boy, this is reality.
And that person is the same age as you, right?
Yeah. Maybe a year or two older, but, going to school on the GI Bill, and all that. But boy, I learned more in the dorm than I learned in class, for sure. Because, I was with guys that, there were hippies on the floor. There were Vietnam veterans on the floor. There were a lot of opinions on both sides. And I was actually sitting in history class one day, and a rock comes through the window. I'm on the second floor, and the rock comes through the window, and everybody gets up out of their seats in class. They look out, and there's a huge fight between a bunch of hippies and ROTC guys. I mean, there must be 20, 25 guys in this fight. They're just slugging it out. Oh. And it was Kent State, you name it, it was going on. And we live in a tough time right now, a lot going on right now. And it reminds me a little bit of, 69, 70, 71. It really does.
Keith Madison's with us here on Sports Spectrum. When does Jesus enter the picture for you, Keith? Because I'm always fascinated by stories, and we could talk about the Beatles for hours. We might have to do, I was talking to Mac Powell from the band Third Day, and he and I were talking about the Beatles for 5 minutes, and I'm like, man, we just need to do another podcast some other time.
I'd love to be a part of that. I'd love to just listen to you guys.
Right, Keith? Let's do it. You can be a part of it too. But I want to talk about faith. I want to bring that and intersect the conversation with your faith in the Lord. So when did that kind of take shape and become a big part of your life?
Yeah, I mean, my parents were the kind of parents that took us to church every time the church doors were open. And this is really foreign to a lot of people, but in rural Kentucky and rural Tennessee, in these small country churches, when you would have revivals once a year, sometimes they would last a week. Sometimes they would last 2 weeks.
Wow.
Sometimes a preacher would preach for 15 minutes. Sometimes he'd preach for an hour and a half.
Yeah.
I mean, you just never knew what to expect. So it's really interesting because this ties in with sports. When I was in the 7th grade, it was the first year I was going to get to play organized basketball, which was a big deal. Now you have all kinds of youth leagues, but then it was 7th grade. And so
that's right. Yeah.
I tried out for the team, and the coach told me I was going to start. I was going to be one of the starting guards, and I was so fired up. But it just so happened that the first night of the revival of our church was going to be on the first night we opened up. And so I thought, man, my dad's not going to let me play. I know he's not going to let me play. And I really didn't have a relationship with Jesus at the time, but I was seeking, I was the youngest in the family, and my whole family was really into that. I couldn't quite totally grasp it. So finally the day came for the game and for the revival to start, and I had to talk with my dad. There's no way around it. So I go to him and I said, Dad, I know the revival starts tonight. I know I need to be there, and I know you want me to be there, but also I get to play basketball tonight for the first time. And he said, son, I'll tell you what, you're 12 years old now. You make that decision. And that was so wise of him.
Wow.
Because I went to my room and I really did think about it. I thought, man. So I called my coach and I said, I don't know if you'll understand this, but I need to go to church tonight. And he said, no worries. You're going to be starting next Thursday night. Don't worry about it. So he was supportive, which was good.
That's huge.
So I go to church that night, Jason, and my buddies and I are playing outside the church. It's a small country church. And all of a sudden we hear the singing and we think, oh man, we're late. And back in those days, this was, 63 or something like that, just when the Beatles are getting ready to explode.
That's right.
But in the country, in rural areas, people would go to church. That was their social activity. So I knew we weren't going to be able to find a seat. So we sort of snuck in the back door, and the only seats available were in the second row. So I had to sit up front.
Oh.
So my buddy and I go up there, and all of this though is like, man, it was just, it was, God was in it, no question. So because I was sitting so close to the preacher, I actually listened to it. And before the sermon was even over, and I'm a shy little kid, probably didn't have a quarter in my pocket, I get up out of my seat and I start walking towards the preacher. I have no idea what I'm doing, except my heart was pounding.
Right. Yeah.
And I just knew this was the time. And I remember just putting my arms around our preacher, and I remember him saying, the time is now. And when he said that, I fell on my knees at the altar, and I remember my mother, both of my grandmothers praying with me. And during that prayer, there was that small voice that Christians talk about. I know you've experienced this.
Yeah.
And this small voice said, turn around and give your mom a hug. And so when I started to do that, it was like total peace. It was, I've come close to experiencing that, but I've never experienced anything quite like it. So I knew that at that point, Jesus had come into my heart, and it changed my life for eternity. So that was when I was, and then I was really, I was very active in our church all the way through high school. And then all of a sudden I'm at Western Kentucky University, which was a big party school, believe it or not. In the middle of the Vietnam War, with great music and all kinds of new ideas being thrown at us, peace and love and all that.
Yeah. Drugs and everything.
Yeah. There was so much exposure to all that. If my mother had known about all that I'd been exposed to, she would have probably tied a rope around me and drugged me back to Brownsville.
Sure.
But she was like all of us, all rural people. We were naive about all those things, but somehow I survived that. And then not only am I thrown into a college situation, the next summer I'm playing baseball with guys from Southern California, from Puerto Rico, from New York. And so I didn't want to be known as this Kentucky hillbilly kid. So I wanted to hang out with the cool guys.
Right.
So, I wanted to hang out with that guy that looked like one of the Beach Boys from California, or that really cool guy from New York that had a different name than mine. And so I followed those guys around and did a few things I shouldn't have done. And I remember going to bed at night and laying on my pillow and asking God to forgive me for what I'd done. And I did that. I did that every night.
Yeah.
And finally, just the lack of spiritual maturity. Finally, I said, God, you don't want to hear me anymore. I do this every night. You don't want to hear this again. And then I just shut God out, and I just started going my own way. And that was a big mistake because I had no peace. I had no peace in my life.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I got married, and my wife, she was not a Christian, but she went to church with me. And even though I wasn't really walking with the Lord, she said, there's something different about you, and I want that. And so she came to Christ, and then she just started wanting to go to church, and she wanted to get active. And I'm not there. I had drifted way away. All I was interested in is my baseball career. And so, but when things really changed, we had our first son, and I remember thinking, man, I want this guy to grow up knowing about Jesus like I did. And coming to Christ at 12, getting married, and then having our first child they were all incredible, life-changing events.
Yeah, I had a similar situation, or I guess experience, when my daughter was born, Keith, because that's kind of when first of all, you understand the magnitude of that, right? And you become a dad, and the responsibility is there. You're like looking at this little child and understanding that that's yours. And
yeah, you got to grow up now. You got to be a man, right?
Yeah. And I was 30 when my daughter was born. So I was a little older, but at the same time, it just meant this life is not about me anymore. This is about her. But yet my faith at that time was a couple years into my faith journey. But I think it's where I really understood that, okay, it's my faith, and, God has saved me, but I have this responsibility now to introduce my daughter to Jesus. Whether she walks that walk the rest of her life, God, I hope so, and I pray. But what a responsibility. And that challenged me to want to be a better example for her, which helped me, I think, grow in my faith. I'm assuming that took place with you as well.
Exactly. I mean, you couldn't have described my life any better once we had our first child. And I just had this desire to make it the best for him. And what more important thing can you do than to give your son or daughter an opportunity to know Jesus?
Yeah. It's the greatest responsibility I think we'll ever have. In fact, I've been thinking about this a lot because my daughter is going into her last year of high school. And, what do you want to be when you grow up? And what are you going to study when you go to school? And I preached on Father's Day this year at my church, and I looked right at the congregation, and my daughter was there. And I said, my desire is for my daughter to have an amazing life, but my real desire is for her to know Jesus for the rest of her life. Everything else, I really don't care. Honestly, whatever happens for the rest of her life, wherever she ends up, whatever she does, obviously, I hope she has so much success. It's I'm going to be her biggest cheerleader, but I just want her to follow Jesus for the rest of her life. And I'll walk around saying, okay, there's nothing else I can complain about.
My favorite story in the Bible, Jason, is the story of the guys who put their paralyzed friend on the mat. It's in the 5th chapter of Luke.
Yes.
And we don't even, those guys are our heroes in the Bible. We don't even know their names, but they put their friend on a mat and they carry him to this house. They can't get in. And you know the story. They take him up on the roof. They take the tile off the roof. And Luke tells us that they put him right in front of Jesus.
Yep.
And that's what you've done for your daughter. You've put her right in front of Jesus.
That's great.
Yeah. And when Jesus saw that paralyzed man, he said, because of their faith, friend, your sins are forgiven. And when I read that a couple of years ago, it was like, wow, I don't think I've ever grasped that before. But Jesus gave credit to the men who carried their friend to him. He said, because of their faith, your sins are forgiven.
That's amazing.
And, yeah. So what we do with our friends, our boldness, our prayers for them and our children. I mean, that is more important than winning the championship game at the College World Series. It's more important than anything that we can do in this life is if we can be that faith person that brings someone to Jesus.
What a responsibility, and what a picture. I think, I hope people who are listening feel like a little goosebumpy like I do right now, because that is exactly what it is. Just introduce them, just bring them to Jesus, and then let Christ do the rest. And
that's right.
It's really all I've tried to do in my life, Keith Madison. We're so glad that you're joining us here on Sports Spectrum. I do want to ask you about your journey, 25 years with Kentucky. And instead of going through it all, because that could be, again, another hour and another podcast, but you were just 26 when you took that job, and you coached until your early 50s. So when you think back to where you were beginning, Keith Madison, as a coach at Kentucky, and where you were when you walked away, what do you think was the biggest difference in who you were as a person from when you arrived there to when you departed as a head coach?
Well, I think when I first got to Kentucky, from a spiritual standpoint, I was a hypocrite. A lot of people, I mean, I was a believer and I came to Christ, as I said, when I was 12, but I really wasn't walking with Christ. I wasn't in the Word. I wasn't really serving Him. Baseball sort of still was my God. And so a lot of people would introduce me, hey, Keith's a believer, and our people would say, it's so good to have a Christian coach at Kentucky or whatever. And I just felt horrible about that, because I wasn't a good representative. And but I remember, I was real shy about the FCA representative at Kentucky at that time was a guy named PJ Throckmorton. He passed away a couple of years ago. I'll never forget him, because he would always invite me, hey, come over to FCA. And, you got a lot of players coming. You should come over and encourage them. And so I finally did. And then after a couple of times, he said, hey, there's a huddle over at Tate Creek High School or wherever. And, why don't you go over and talk to them? I said, oh, PJ, man, I'm not ready for that. Mm-hmm. And and I know you've heard this before, but he used it on me, and it hit me right between the eyes. He said, brother, God doesn't want your ability. He wants your availability.
Yes.
I said, man, okay. What can I say to that? So I started doing that. And through that, I started growing, because I didn't want to be that guy that stood up in front of a group of kids and said one thing, and then the next day do a different thing. So I really tried to live it, and I made a lot of mistakes, but I really, just that responsibility really helped me grow up a little bit as a believer. And then when I ended my career at Kentucky, I had spent a lot of time with many different players talking about faith on bus rides, in my office, at the field after practice. And then in the late 80s, right when we were probably having some of the best years we ever had while I was coaching there, my wife went through breast cancer. And her doctor said she had about a 50% chance of surviving that. You talk about taking you to your knees, man.
Right. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, I could not get close enough to God. I wanted to be in Him, and I wanted Him to be in me. And I needed Him to walk with me on that journey, because my boys were like 4th grade and 2nd grade at the time. And my wife was, just one of the best people in the world. I just couldn't dream of her going through this. So she went through the chemo and everything. God really helped us through it. And I remember I was going on a recruiting trip over at Louisville one time, and I'm on I-64 and I'm praying. And I remember praying this prayer, Jason. I don't know if this is biblical, and I don't know if this is good or not, but I said, Lord, if you'll just let Sharon stay with me until those boys get raised, until we get them off to college, I'll be so thankful. Well, now, they're 42 and 40, and Sharon she's got more energy than I have. And so God boy, when He answers a prayer, He doesn't mess around.
Right.
He he really does it well.
Yeah, he went further than your prayer. That's for sure.
Yeah, so that helped me grow a lot, and during the mid part of my career, and then by the end, I'm certainly not Paul or Peter or anybody like that, but I've my faith is very important to me now, very important.
This episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast is presented by Operation Christmas Child. It's a project of the Christian International Relief Organization Samaritan's Purse, and it's the world's largest Christmas project of its kind. The mission of Operation Christmas Child is to demonstrate God's love in a tangible way to children in need around the world and to share the good news of Jesus Christ. Delivered into the hands of children through local churches, every shoebox gift with Operation Christmas Child is an opportunity to share about Jesus Christ and God's love. Since 1993, Operation Christmas Child has collected and delivered more than 188 million gift-filled shoeboxes to children in more than 170 countries and territories. And this year hopes to collect enough shoebox gifts to reach another 10 million children. So will you join us? Will you join Operation Christmas Child this season by packing shoebox gifts or building a shoebox gift online? National Collection Week is coming up November 15th through the 22nd. That's where shoeboxes will be collected across the country at nearly 5,000 drop-off locations. We'd love to have you join us. Anyone can do it. Individuals, families, churches, students, groups. Packing a shoebox is a great way to teach kids about thankfulness and giving back to those in need. Check out SamaritansPurse.org/OCC for Operation Christmas Child. SamaritansPurse.org/OCC to learn how to pack a shoebox or build one online. Operation Christmas Child. When you finished coaching, you walked away from Kentucky coaching at a pretty young age. Like I said, It was probably, I think you were 51 or 52 years old, and there's still many more years to coach, but you felt the tugging to leave and to kind of enter into a new phase in life. Take me through that and kind of the decision behind it and really what leads to you ending up at SCORE and serving with them.
Yeah, it's, I'll try to make this concise because I don't want this to go too long, but I remember my last year, we'd had a couple of really tough years. We had a great year, I think 3 years before that. We had Andy Green, who's coaching with the Cubs now, Brandon Webb, who won the Cy Young Award in 2006. We had a guy named John Wilson, who was a catcher All-American. I mean, we had a really good team. And then all of a sudden, it was like the bottom fell out. And the guys I recruited, and signed either went pro or, it seemed like recruiting was not going in the right direction. So in 2003, I remember mid-season, we were really struggling as a team, and we had some good players, but not enough. And I'm in the dugout, and we're playing Kent State University in a midweek game, and we're playing well. My pitcher's throwing strikes, we're making plays, we're getting timely hits, we're putting it all together. I remember thinking, hey, this is the day we're turning it around. This is it. We're going to be in the NCAA regionals again. And as soon as I had that thought, that still small voice came to me again, as we talked about earlier. And this voice said, Keith, this is your last year coaching in Kentucky. Wow. I mean, I'm in the dugout.
I don't want to hear that voice, right?
Yeah. I don't want to hear that because I'm hey, I'm competing. I'm turning it around.
Yeah.
So I sort of dismissed it, and we won the game. The next day we won again. But that Friday night we played Arkansas, and Arkansas was ranked something like 9th in the nation. They were very good. And they absolutely pounded us. It was humiliating. So I didn't sleep much that night. I'm thinking about back on Tuesday, hearing that voice and really, really taking it seriously. So that morning, Sharon and I are having a cup of coffee. And I said, Sharon, I got to tell you this. I wasn't going to tell you, but I got to tell you. Last Tuesday, during the game, I felt like God was telling me that this was my last year coaching at Kentucky. And I thought she would say, no, you just need to pray about it and get through the season. We'll talk about it, pray about it this summer. But instead she went, yes, just like that.
Wow.
I went, wow, I did not expect that at all. because her saying yes meant that our future was uncertain. So, but she did. Then my brother, who loved watching us play, came over later that morning. He was up from Chattanooga, and I told him the story, and he said something that shocked me as well. He said, that's really great because you and Sharon are going to be able to do some things you've never been able to do before, because you've always been tied to recruiting and competing, and now you guys can just do some things you've always wanted to do. Oh, man, that does not sound like my brother, because he's even more competitive than I am. So I thought, man, this is affirmed. That was definitely God speaking to me, and two people who are really, really close to me are telling me that's okay. So before the weekend was over, I had met with an assistant athletic director. Monday morning, I met with Mitch Barnhart, our athletic director, and I'm not a crier, but I sat there and talked to Mitch in our press box, and he's a believer. And I cried. I said, I had tears just running down my cheek because I was looking out over the field. And I said, Mitch, I can't believe I'm walking away from this. I've been doing this 25 years. I love this, but I really feel like God's wanting me to go. And Mitch prayed for me, and he, maybe he wanted to send me on my way. I don't know, because we were struggling at that time, but no, he was a friend, and he knew how much I cared. And he did pray for me, and I finished the season. I announced I was going to retire at the end of the season. And the last game of the year, they had some ceremonies and things like that. And the president of the university was there. His name is Lee Todd. And Dr. Todd came up to me after the game. He said, Keith, what are you going to do? You're 51 years old. What are you going to do now? And I said, Dr. Todd, I have no idea what I'm going to do, but I know God's calling me out of coaching. He said, well, after graduation, come over to my office. Let's talk about it. So he hired me to work for the university for a couple of years. And it really was a great time for me to see what God wanted me to do. It gave me time to seek his direction. Yeah. And then I went on the mission trip that you and I talked about earlier. And next thing you know, I'm working for Score International. I'm leading coaches and baseball teams to the Dominican Republic. We're serving down there. We're sharing the gospel. And God had a plan, no doubt about it.
Amazing story. Tell everybody real quick what Score International is, because I know there's some of our listeners who might not be aware of it.
Yeah, right. Score International is a ministry started by a man by the name of Ron Bishop. He was a former basketball coach, and he took a basketball team to Mexico, and God called him into ministry and said, hey, sports is a great way to share the gospel.
Yes, it is.
And he used to tell me, hey, sports and music, if you want to reach people, those are the vehicles that God has let us be a part of. Absolutely. To share it. And he was right. And so, I've been to the Dominican Republic 30 times. And what the Score International does, it makes, if you have a church group or a school group or a team, it makes serving easy for you, because if you're a coach, you can use us. We set up the travel, we set up the hotel, we set up the translators and the buses and the ministry opportunities, and it's a good. I've taken the University of Louisville baseball team with me twice. We've had other teams, North Carolina State. It's been a blast to do that, because you have these really good athletes, and they got some swag, and they feel pretty good about themselves. And in 2 days, their hearts are just open and soft, and they just love the kids they see. And it changes their whole perspective on life. And when you get back, you look in your closet, you got 5 pair of shoes, and you're going, wow, didn't we just see, 100 kids without shoes? Didn't we just see kids, 5 years old wearing their underwear to the ballpark? I mean, it just opens up doors, as you know, Jason, and it opens up doors to share the gospel, and it opens up our hearts to be a little more humble and a little more thankful.
Yeah, I've talked to many people, especially that are part of ministries that have partnered with pro athletes, places like UPI, places like Water Mission, some of our sponsors, Compassion International, and even now Score, and hearing that. And it's something that happens when they go down there. And like you said, it softens the heart, it wrecks them in many ways. I'm fascinated why the DR, why particularly the Dominican Republic.
Well, for some reason, even though Ron Bishop was a basketball guy, he went when he was a young man. He went on a mission trip with some older men, and that's for some reason that's where they picked to go. And he met Felipe Alou on that trip.
Sure.
And he was a believer, and so Coach Bishop went back again and again. And so on my second trip down there, he said, "I'm a basketball guy. You're a baseball guy. We need you to bring baseball people down here." And so John Zeller, who is our executive director now, he's a baseball guy too. And he started this thing called the November Baseball Outreach. And we started inviting coaches and businessmen to go to the DR because baseball is just, it's like football in Texas or basketball in Kentucky. And, it's just huge. And every kid that wants to be some kind of athlete pretty much plays baseball there.
That's right.
And it's a country that has only 9 million people, but they have about 150 guys playing in the big leagues because they are good. I don't know whether it's a genetic thing or a weather thing or a combination, but they're just good. And they're passionate about baseball. So anyway, I started taking people down there, and John Zeller was also involved with Baseball Chapel, and he had met Mariano Rivera. So Mariano goes with us on a couple of trips. Andy Pettit's been with us like 3 times.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you tell your buddies, "Hey, Andy Pettit's going to be on the trip with us." And you had all of a sudden you have friends you didn't know you had, and they want to go on a mission trip.
So I believe that trip is a little bit larger.
Yeah. So we started taking about 200 men on that trip and putting on free baseball clinics for about 6,000 kids while we're there. Just unbelievable. And sharing the gospel with every one of those kids.
Right. That's the intentional part, is
Exactly.
You use baseball to then feed them God's word too. And that's probably the most, I would have to imagine, the most satisfying part, right? It's baseball is fun, but when you see a kid transformed because of what Christ could do and has done and will do in their lives, that's got to make you walk away and say, this is all worth it.
You are exactly right.
Yeah. It's so amazing to watch. Keith, this has been a really great conversation. As we wind down here, I want to ask you one last question. And you got a big birthday coming up at the end of October. I only know that because my mom's birthday is actually just a couple days after yours, same year, 1951. She turned 70, and we're going to make sure we spoil her and take care of her. But that's a big year, and certainly a big milestone for you. As you think about coming up on 70 years old and the life that God has led you towards and where you want to finish, what does that look like for you in terms of finishing well, in terms of kind of going these last, whatever it is, maybe it's 30 years, who knows, but whatever it is, finishing well for God, what does that look like for you?
What a great question, man. Just a great question. I remember when I got into my 60s, when I became 60, I felt like I could still fake it a little bit. I could still do things. And now it's more of an acceptance of, hey, there's no question when you go to McDonald's, you're going to get the senior deal. They can see it now. I can't fake it anymore.
Can't hide it anymore. That's right.
But I do want to finish strong, and I've really gotten into this coach's ministry, and I hear from a lot of guys, and I have a heart for coaches. I may be very naive, Jason, but I really believe, and there's a lot of other professions that are so valuable. I mean, my wife's doctors are extremely valuable.
Absolutely.
And I'm not minimizing anything else, but I really believe that if coaches got their hearts right, and a lot of them do already, but if more coaches got their hearts right, we can change the world. Mm-hmm. We could really change the world. I mean, you think of, let's just take baseball for an example of, the average college baseball team has about 35 guys on it. Boy, if coaches really, if they really coach that guy for eternity instead of just for the 2 or 3 years that they can try to get them to help them win a championship, all of a sudden those guys become good husbands. They become good fathers. They become, dynamic Christian leaders in their communities. Boy, I mean, I've seen a lot of changes in our country. I can see a great change for the good if I can get about 1,000 more people on my team and try to influence coaches to influence their players. I really believe that, because in my life, there came a time in my life, Jason, where I had a great dad, but there came a time in my life I didn't listen to my dad. I was a teenager. I thought I knew it all. What does he know? But I listened to my coach. Man, whatever my coaches told me, yeah, I'm going to do it. I had a coach one year tell me, he said, I don't want you to drink soda and I don't want you to eat candy while you're playing basketball for me this year. And I didn't. Wow. Because you know what? He didn't want me to. That's how much influence coaches have. Now, I don't know if everybody's like me, but they're probably not all that gullible. But, I just believed in my coaches, and coaches have, you've heard it many, many times, that coaches have influence, the thing that Billy Graham said.
Yes.
It's true. And not just because I coach, but I see it in others. And I look at people, I look at coaches that all they think about is winning a championship because they think that's what they're getting paid for. Yeah, they're getting paid to do that. But all that's going to burn. It's going to be gone.
Yep.
I mean, the awards I've gotten when I'm in a nursing home in 20 years or whatever, you think those are going to be important to me? No, it's my family's going to be important to me. My relationship with Christ is going to be important to me because I'm going to be seeing him in person soon.
That's right. So
if we can just get people to stretch their faith and to really accept that, hey, this is a blip on the timeline of eternity, and we're going to be living forever with Jesus. And I don't know you very well, Jason, but you know what? Someday I'm going to know you really well.
That's right.
We're going to get to hang out a lot. It's going to be fun.
Yeah. We're going to be laughing like, oh, a podcast?
Yeah.
Zoom? That's nothing compared to what's happening right now. Yeah, it's funny because you hear people say when they get to heaven, are they looking down and, are they watching over? And that's great. And I get it's a comfort for a lot of people. But I'm guessing when I get up there, I'm not going to be too worried about what's going on down here because I'm going to be rejoicing and be I'm just going to be so focused on spending eternity and being in the presence of our Father. So
that's right. Yeah, you're right. We're going to be laughing. It's going to be it's going to be a joy, man.
It's going to be a party. Yeah.
And I just hope that some of the Beatles make it. Just hope.
I'm with you. Yeah, you never know. I mean, how great would it be to be up there and suddenly, Hey Jude starts playing and we just start dancing to it. That would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Keith Madison. Listen, this has been a fantastic conversation. It's funny, I was doing the math as I wind down. 25 years. You mentioned 35 players per team, and obviously some of that overlaps, but that's somewhere in the 600 to 700 to maybe even 800 range of people that you've impacted. And who knows how many of those people have then gone on to impact. That's really what all this is about. And that's why one person is so important when you're thinking about your ministry, those who are listening. Maybe you don't have a mega church of people coming to hear you or to be impacted by you. But if you got one who can impact one, who can impact one, now you got something pretty awesome that's happening. So
that's it.
Keith, thanks, buddy. Thanks for being on the show.
Jason.
All the best to you, my friend.
Really enjoyed it.
And many thanks to Keith Madison, the former Kentucky baseball coach, for joining us here today on Sports Spectrum. I loved his answer at the end of the podcast about finishing well. Wasn't that great? That is how I want to finish. When I think about my life and my journey, and I'm not even 50 years old yet. Keith is about to be 70. I just want to finish well. I want to finish well. I want to point people to Christ. I want to live a journey and a life that is pleasing to him and that points people to him. That's part of why I'm so passionate about what we're doing here at Sports Spectrum, because we get to point people to Jesus through sports by telling these stories, by bringing people on like Keith Madison to share the gospel and to talk about his sports journey as well. So love that conversation. Please consider sharing this conversation with someone that you know that might be impacted. Maybe it's a coach that you know who wants to lead well. Man, share with them Keith Madison and this conversation, and then look up Keith Madison on the internet and follow along with his ministry, this coaching ministry that he's a part of, and also serving with SCORE International. Just great work there as well. So appreciate Keith for being here today on the show. Make sure you check out our website, sportspectrum.com, for all of our content, devotionals, podcasts, articles. It's all free. right there at sportspectrum.com. And as I mentioned, share this podcast with someone that you think needs to hear it and let them know about Sports Spectrum. Use Sports Spectrum as a place, as a resource for someone to share the gospel, to introduce sports and faith and show them who Jesus is and how Jesus can work even in the sports world. We love you guys. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time right here on Sports Spectrum. Have a great rest of your day. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon.